Welcome to Corwin's Leaders Coaching Leaders podcast with hosts Peter DeWitt and Michael Nelson. This podcast is from education leaders for education leaders. Every week, Peter, Mike, and our guests get together to share ideas, put research into practice, and ensure that every student is learning not by chance, but by design.
Michael Nelson, here we are.
Another
of Leaders
episode.
Coaching Leaders.
Yeah, I'm excited. This guest, wow, we have Jim Knight with us, Peter.
We do, yeah. Jim Knight. I've known Jim for many years. Actually, when I left my role as principal, I was starting to work with John Hattie, and then Jim. I worked with Jim for a year on instructional coaching. So yeah.
I think, those in the education world, do you know John Hattie? And then what's another name that you might know? I think Jim Knight might pop up as somebody they know, somebody they have read or connected with. That says something. He's done a lot in his career.
Yeah, it's definitely synonymous with instructional coaching. He's been doing research on instructional coaching for many years. So Jim started the instructional coaching group, and he has been doing research around instructional coaching for well over 25 years. And you're right. When you hear instructional coaching, you think Jim Knight. So we get to interview him and talk to him a bit about his research, but also he just had an IC Toolkit that came out in October and quickly went to bestseller. He actually talks about how it went to bestseller in 2 weeks. And he has quite the following. I mean, he really does. And it's expanding around the world. So what do you want people to think about when they're listening to this interview?
Gosh, that toolkit book is pretty remarkable. And he kind of divides things into 7 different factors. But, 7's a lot. You and I've talked about how does your mind remember that? And he really clustered the 7 into 3 groups. If you really listen to him, the first 3, he clusters together, and then the second 3, and then the last one, he really builds in the system approach. And I like the way in which he clustered them, because for me, I can hold on to that information as I think through his work. And he uses the word listening quite a bit. And we'll talk about that a little bit more at the outro after our listeners have had a chance to hear from Jim. But he uses the word listen in lots of different contexts and analogies, and really that is the key to coaching and helping the person that you're coaching transfer and make a difference for students.
Yeah, and one of the things I want people to listen for is when we ask him about what he's learned about his own research over the last few decades that he's been doing this work, he really talked about the learning trajectory he went on since 2006. And I really want people to hear that, because so often our listeners, like school leaders or instructional coaches, think they're supposed to know it all. And what they have to realize is that they're growing at the same time that they're doing this work, just like when you and I are writing books, we're growing at the same time. So I'm very excited for people to listen to our podcast interview with Jim Knight.
Say goodbye to slow-paced teaching methods and join an innovative new framework. With Teacher Clarity Professional Learning Workshops, teachers can learn how to double the speed of learning with clear goals and measurable outcomes. Get started today at corwin.com.
Jim Knight, welcome to Leaders Coaching Leaders podcast.
Peter, it's so great to see you. Michael, nice to meet you. I'm excited to be here and grateful for the invitation.
It's always good to see you. So you, first, I'd like to actually just say congratulations, because your IC Toolkit went to bestseller super fast, and because it just came out in October. So tell us a little bit more about the content of the book.
So the book was a bestseller in 2 weeks, which was kind of a record for me, for sure. Wow. The toolkit, I kept seeing people, IC is our little acronym for coaches. So instructional coaches, just a short form for instructional coaches. And so the toolkit is for people who support instructional coaches or who are instructional coaches. So it could be a team, could be a person working on their own. And what I kept seeing is people who were getting together with their coaches, but they weren't doing really productive professional development only because they weren't really sure what to do. So this is kind of organized into, these are tools you could use over 36 weeks to deepen your beliefs, your skills, and your understanding of the coaching process, the management framework. But it's also, so it has different things you could use. It's got cases, it's got video clips that are linked in, it's got protocols you could use for discussion. And it's got all the articles pretty much I've written for the last 20 years. So there's about 48 articles, columns from Ed Leadership or the Learning Professional, or before that, the Journal of Staff Development, and blogs we've written. And so it's kind of and it's organized around what we think are critical for coaching, the 7 success factors. So there's 3 factors about who you are, 3 factors about what you do. What you do is the impact cycle and data and teaching strategy. So how to write a playbook or how to gather data. And then 1 about the system. That's the 7th. You work in a system that support. Where I work would be the 3rd part. So, and there's an assessment at the front people can use just to sort of figure out where they want to work. So they can say, I really think we need to work on we don't have a playbook. We need to work on an instructional playbook. Or I think we need to deepen our skills on the way we gather data. Or, I think our communication skills, we're making progress, but when I watch my videos and I think about these things, there's a lot more we can do. So that's the idea. Something you could take, everybody could get a copy of it. And as the coaches are getting developed, they could use that as something they look at every week. They might pick a case, they might pick a story, they might pick an article, they might look at a video clip and discuss it. And there's little, there's protocols you can use, but there's protocols in the book you could use to read the book. So that's the idea. It's a toolkit for instructional coaches.
That sounds fantastic.
What's cool is Jessica Wise and Amy Masante and Michelle Harris, they put the thing together, and there's a lot of things we've created over the years. They're all my articles, and there's things, but they put a lot of things into it. So I have next to nothing to do with it. And then they really deserve a lot of credit for creating this thing in a really ridiculously short period of time, like 6 weeks or something, because they just brought all the pieces together. They came up with the pathways, they developed a lot of the protocols and put them in there. And so when I got the book, my overwhelming emotion was just proud for the team. I thought, gosh, these people put together something really awesome. So I'm really proud of the book. I think it turned out really great, and it had nothing to do with me beyond the fact that I wrote the stuff. The rest of it was all them and Corwin. Corwin did a great job of designing it and putting it together.
Oh, that's awesome.
I love the choose your own pathway of learning instructional coaching. Our minds all work differently, and how we approach things and the way in which it's personalized is really, as you just described, absolutely fantastic. I saw a quote on your website, and it to me, it ties to, Jim, what we have just been talking about. And it's the difference between coaches who have positive impact and those who do not is leadership. Can you unpack that, what you mean a little bit by that?
So the leaders that the coaches, I'm getting old, so I don't remember everything I said. That's the problem here. But are we talking about the leaders that support the coaches first? But let's talk about it from 2 different perspectives. So one part is that they're working in a system where they're evaluated by leaders who understand what coaching is, using a tool that was designed by coaches. It's often the case that the person evaluating the coach doesn't really understand coaching and is using something developed for teachers. So that doesn't make sense. We have a book called Evaluating Instructional Coaching that's all about that. But role clarity is crucial, is what we found. There was a study that my colleagues did at the University of Kansas where we found coaches really didn't even understand what their job was, and they often don't have time to do the work. And then it's really important that people will do what the principal says they'll do. They might not even like the principal, but they still want to please the principal. So if the principal says, I think this coach is important, then it's going to happen. And then if the principal is actually being coached, it could be really helpful. So this is really item 7 on our list of the 7 success factors. There's system support, particularly principal support. But the coaches themselves, they need to lead themselves and they need to lead others. And by leading themselves, and I wrote about this in the definitive guide, but by leading themselves, they need to know what they're all about, what's most important, what's their purpose. And then they need to be able to structure their lives so they're actually able to live out their purpose. And then they need to interact with other people in ways that amplify their capacities, that help them unleash their potential, so to speak. And for that, we found that you need to balance ambition and humility. We did a big study in Florida where we started with 2,000 coaches, and we narrowed it down to 5 truly outstanding coaches. And we found the ones that were really successful had this combination of ambitious for change and responsive to teachers.
Mm.
And then I like the idea, Liz Wiseman's idea of being a multiplier, not a diminisher, and not being an accidental diminisher. So they need to lead themselves. They need to lead others in a way that unleashes others' potential, doesn't limit people, doesn't diminish them. And they need to have leaders who support them.
I love what you just talked about in terms of the balance and in leadership for the coach themselves and the of others. What I've experienced, Jim, is I was a former superintendent, and so had leadership coaches in our system working, and I would meet with them and they would say, "Oh, I had a breakthrough moment. I had," and it was this I statement. And I would sit and listen to the story about the coach's breakthrough moment that they felt. And I said, "But did the person your coach have a breakthrough moment?" And it was the nonverbals of the coach themselves sat back in their chair and went, "Oh, can you confirm that the coachee, so to speak, had that moment of clarity that would change practice for the betterment of student learning?" And it's a fascinating, but there does need to be the balance because
Mm.
that coach is watching closely, and navigating each and every conversation that they do. So thank you for that.
I'll just respond to that quickly. I did a podcast with Kate Murphy, who wrote a wonderful book called "You're Just Not Listening," and she was at our conference, the TLC conference this year. And someone asked her, I just did a kind of interview with her. Someone asked her, "How do you know if you've been listening effectively?"
Mm.
And she said, "Well, the first thing I'd ask myself is, what did I learn in the conversation?
Mhm.
And if I didn't learn anything, I'm probably not listening." So I thought that's a pretty obvious, but it's one of those things where I had never thought of it, but it's pretty obvious when you hear it.
Yeah,
Love
I
that.
think it's an excellent point because Mike and I often talk about having that learner's mindset when we go into whether we're facilitating workshops, whether we're coaching, whatever it might be. And we have a question for you about that in just a few minutes. But I'm glad you mentioned the whole idea of like the coaches not always understanding their role, because that's been a really interesting thing that I've learned over the years when instructional coaches come to workshops and those kind of things. The one thing that they actually talk about is the biggest barrier is that they don't have a defined role when they're in their school. And
Mm.
that's amazing to me because your work has been so impactful over a few decades. I'm just going to say it that way. And why do you think that still it's hard for coaches to define a role?
Well, I think people don't go the distance. I
Mhm.
wrote a column a few months ago about nominal change,
Mhm.
change in name only. And you can see that with, for example, professional learning communities or walkthroughs or any kind of initiative. Like it can be done in a kind of a superficial way. And there's a lot of research on innovation science that says you have to really go the distance to make things work. And so I think it's not uncommon to have people hire a coach and say, "Go out there and coach them, do your thing and coach up those teachers, fix them." And so there's not a careful planning, and that's the part of the 7 success factors and the assessment that's in the IC Toolkit. We see those 7 success factors as a rubric for high quality coaching. If the coach doesn't know how to gather data, they're not going to see things clearly in the classroom. They're not going to be able to set goals. They're not going to be able to monitor progress. They're going to miss things. The coach
Yeah.
doesn't have a set of teaching practices. They're not going to be able to help people hit their goals. If they don't have a conversational framework, they're going to flounder.
Mhm.
And then if they're not good listeners, it's pretty hard. Like I always say, listening and questioning are to coaching like skating is to hockey. It's you can't play the game unless you can ask good questions and listen effectively. And so when you look at those 7 things, that gives you a way to zone in on what you need to do. And it's to my mind understandable, I suppose. I'm pretty rushed too. I feel I get the issue of time poor, but if you have like a district with 100 coaches, but the coaches don't have a clear plan of what they're supposed to do, effective professional development and professional learning, It's kind of crazy to invest all that money in the coaches, but not invest in the development. And then the other thing along role clarity is, without role clarity, they end up doing all kinds of things that aren't high leverage. They need to be spending their attention and their energy on the things they're going to have the greatest impact on student achievement and student well-being, not figuring out what's the furniture need to look like in the math lab, or not being a host for a visitor to the school for a day. They need to focus on what can we do to keep kids in the school and make sure they succeed.
So I want to ask you kind of one of the things I've seen on social media is that you have been doing institutes around the world. I mean, you're exhausting to keep up with. You were in Paris. Lindsay Deacon told me she was going to be going to attend the institute in Paris, and then saw that you were recently in Singapore as well. So what is it like with all these institutes that are happening internationally?
I should probably say a bit about our organization first. So
Yeah,
the instructional coaching group, which you were a part of us for a little while, instructional coaching group is a B Corp. So a B Corp is an organization that's gone through a rigorous process to be identified as a company focused on benefit.
Mhm.
So, like my granola that I looked at this morning, it's got a little B. There's a B in a. If you start to look for it, Tom's toothpaste is a B Corp. Nespresso somehow is a B Corp. But you have to go through a really rigorous process. That it says something about the way you work with the people in your organization, and it says a lot about what you're trying to accomplish. And we have a sort of a north point on our compass is excellent instruction every day in every class for every student everywhere. And everywhere is Toronto and it's Tanzania. It's every we're now that north point on our compass isn't very close. There's so much to do, but we really do want to have a global impact. And so one way we've done that is we've partnered with the Growth Coaching International out of Australia and New Zealand, and they're now a part of the instructional coaching group. And in Growth Coaching International, geographically, it gives us access to more parts of the world, but also it expands our suite of things we can offer. So there's students coaching students, and there's a lot around leadership coaching. So John and Christian Van Nieuwenburg wrote a book called The New Leader's Guide to Coaching in Schools. And so we're able to offer all that, but the heart of the matter, the issue is we just want, if you take my long phrase and you narrow it down to what's kind of our catchphrase for we're going to keep kids first. We want to do the best we can for kids. And it doesn't matter to me if they're in Ghana or they're in Galt. I want to make sure that we're having access. So that means I have to admit, it's not a hard charge to go off to Paris for a week and do a workshop. Our workshop was, we had to walk by the Eiffel Tower every day, like the view of the Eiffel Tower to go to our
that
workshop.
sounds tough.
So it was kind of fun, and it is fun to go to these other places, but we really want to spread goodness as best we can, and we want kids to have greater well-being, want better learning, but we also want, that's not going to happen unless the teachers have greater well-being, and teachers are treated like the professionals that they are. That's really, really kind of the heart of the matter for us.
That's actually been at the core of what you've been saying for many years.
Right.
Because I remember a video from a long time ago that you were saying the same thing about if teachers are treated, like students, if teachers are treated like they don't have master's degrees and they're experts, there's an issue where that's concerned. So,
yeah, I don't think you can bully people into good teaching. I just don't think it makes sense. And I think the question is, do you think teachers are professionals, or do you think they're unskilled laborers?
Mhm.
So if you're training somebody how to stack the shelves at Walmart, you don't have to interact with them in a way that honors them as professionals. But if you're, and there's some things you want to get clear, if it's, you want to do it exactly the right way. Like the guy who checks my plane before I got on it to make sure that the motor is safe. I don't want him to go, it looks good to me, I feel good about it. I want him to know, and he got it right. But professional discourse is honoring what makes you a professional is making decisions in the moment. When we take away the people's ability to make decisions, it doesn't work. First off, DC and Ryan make that clear. But secondly, it decreases people's motivation.
Mm.
I could just continue to have this conversation all day. I love the fact that the way in which you speak about the individualization and really getting to know the people and the processes, the 7 steps that you set up, Jim. That's fascinating, and how you've clustered the first 2, and then you connect to the system, which is something that Peter and I talk quite at length about. We've gotten into not doing as many keynote one-time type presentations and moving into working in a hybrid approach with both in person as
Right.
well as hybrid or virtual type sessions. And we are finding it fascinating to gather pieces of data and then evidence that they have moved what we have talked about into practice, so that transfer. Describe a coach's situation and how they begin to discover that they're unlocking that transfer, and the conversation is beyond the adult level but moving into the student level.
Well, we're with you. I mean, we agree with that. We think you need to look at different ways you can share information. So I don't want to be like making a big advertisement here, but we have a thing called Radical Learners.
Mhm.
And so people can take a course on Radical Learners. But a bigger part of what we do is one-to-one coaching, because
Mhm.
we feel that, not surprisingly, coaches need coaching just like teachers need coaching. And so we set people up with coaches who walk them through the steps of the impact cycle. And I think even though, like, we have a really intensive institute that's 16 weeks long, but you could take that 16 weeks of institute and not change anything. But the one-to-one coaching, we say, okay, week 1, you need to have your pre-coaching conversation with the teacher. Week 2, you need to get a clear picture of current reality, set your goal. Week 3, you identify the strategy. And
Mhm.
so we've got tools that are laid out, and then the coach walks them through the whole process. And I think it's in the doing of coaching and getting the one-to-one support. Sometimes it's just a matter of accountability. I know I'm going to have to talk to that person next Tuesday, so I better make sure I do it. But it's what we've known for a long time about transfer. It's in the doing that it becomes clear, and that's why I think one-to-one coaching, whether it's coaching for teachers or for coaches or for leaders, I think it's, and I don't want to dismiss workshops and keynotes and so forth either. They're good for awareness,
Mhm.
but within a day you've forgotten 50%. The evidence says, and within a week you've forgotten 70. And anybody who takes something from a workshop and does it, they probably had to reteach themselves to do it. And so that's why we want to have instructional coaching to support people who learn things. It provides awareness. It gets you interested. You might say, "Oh, Hattie's visible learning. I think I really need to work on success criteria." But a week later, people are like, "What was that again?" If you have a coach there that says, "Okay, let's start developing success criteria. Let's set a goal with students to see a student change that'll show whether or not it works. Let's monitor if we're hitting our goal or not. If we have to make adjustments, we'll work together to do it." If that's what the teacher wants to zone in on, then I think you've got a chance for something significant happening.
All right, Jim, I have one last question for you, and it's kind of a big one. So
Oh, good.
I've known you for years. I remember the first
Right.
day you walked into the Corwin retreat when I was speaking, and Jim Knight walked in, and I went, "Oh no, what am I supposed to do now?" Jim Knight's walking in.
Let me stop you right there. But I walked in to tell you how much I appreciated your call and how great. And I said, "You're going to work with us for a little while, but it won't take very long before you're gone." So
That is
I
exactly
walked
what
in
he
to tell
said.
you my admiration and respect for you. But go ahead.
I, I, one of the things that I've always loved about your work is just the reciprocal learning piece. That's always been ingrained with me. Walking in to learn something, not just to teach something. I think that always spoke to like who I felt like I was, and it was just so freeing to have you talk to us about that. But I'm just wondering, with all the work that you've been doing over the years, what has been kind of the biggest learning lesson for you that you've had?
Oh, it's just so much. I mean,
Yeah.
if you look at instructional coaching, the 2006 book, almost everything in that book is obsolete now. We didn't have
Mm.
the impact cycle. We didn't have
Mhm.
instructional playbooks. I hadn't written high impact instruction. We didn't know how to gather data. And if you look at the 7 success factors, the only thing that's kind of stayed kind of similar is the partnership principles. But And then I've broadened my understanding of coaching. I used to think, instructional coaching was the only way to go. But in working with John Campbell and Christian Van Nuremberg, I've really come to see that there's a place for facilitative coaching, and there's a place for dialogical coaching, and there's times you have to be directive. I wouldn't call it coaching, but there's times you have to be, somebody's unprofessional. You can't say, how do you feel about it? And it's got to change. Or somebody's trying to find their way to a landmark. You don't say, other times you've been trying to find a landmark, what's work for you? You just tell them how to get there. So there's a place for each of those things. To me, it's almost like, this is before your time, gentlemen, but we used to have these radios that had little buttons on them. And you would push.
I have them all over my house, by the way.
Oh, okay, you probably would. So you push this button and it would get you the CBC in Canada. And this button would get you the rock and roll station. And I see that in coaching, that and maybe I start directive if I'm a leader, and then I push the button for facilitative and I say, so what do you think you could do here? What are some ideas? I know you've been thinking about this. What are you thinking you might do? And then you might push dialogical and you say, well, would it help if I shared some things? Now, I'm not trying to tell you what to do, but I'd like to get your opinion. So I would say the broader spectrum of possibilities for coaching around those three areas is another big learning experience. I'll just say one more thing. Maybe the most important thing is that right now, when you think about professional development, research has been done. Mm-hmm. A consultant's going to learn that research. They're going to teach teachers. Teachers are going to take it to their students so that the students will have better outcomes. We flip it. We say, start with kids. So we say, what's the change we want to see in students? The coach works with the teacher to set a goal on that change. Then the coach says, let's look at what the research says. Research is just as important, but it's embedded in real life activity. And we believe when you start with the research, you often get compliance, poor implementation that's not sustained. But when you start with kids and you hit a goal the teacher really wants to go after related to engagement or achievement, and then you look at the research, when you do it that way, it's way more powerful. So I would say, starting with kids is the critical thing. Probably the most important thing we've learned.
I think, one of the things that I want to say, Jim, is just if people unpack just the last couple of minutes of what you've said, it's not just the fact that you want coaches to have that impact on teachers, but you are open to that learning trajectory that you've been on. So any teacher that's new, or any teacher that's a veteran that's kind of listening, or any leader that's a veteran that's listening, need to understand that we're all supposed to keep learning. And that's exactly what your statement just epitomized.
Yeah, Brad Stats has a book called Never Stop Learning, and I think that's a great. Not only that, it's fun.
Yeah.
So it's like, I would say you make the list of the top 5 things that make for a fulfilling life. Learning's got to be on the list.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to say thank you on many different levels. First of all, you've impacted a lot of educators in so many beautiful ways in terms of providing them a sense of purpose and getting back to the joy of why they chose to move into the profession. And your work just continues to ripple in so many ways, and truly just thank you for your leadership in supporting education. It really is beyond incredible.
Well, we're all part of a movement, I think, and the movement is let's treat teachers the way they deserve to be treated as professionals so that we can have the best possible outcome for kids. And I think we're all doing the same thing. And the people we work with in the schools, they're teaching us as much as we're teaching them. I just feel like I'm being swept along, and we have our roadblocks, we have our challenges, and it's really hard to predict the future. But when things work, they have a tendency to stick around if they're done effectively. And it's exciting to be a part of that movement and work with people like the two of you. So I'm loving it.
Well, Jim, I can't end without thanking you, because you've had an enormous impact on me over the 10 years. I know we worked together briefly, but you've had an enormous impact over me over the past 10 years, because we have stayed in touch and we have remained friends. So your work has always been just very profound to me, and how you treat people too. I just think that's so important. So thank you for being on the Leaders Coaching Leaders podcast and giving us some of your time before you jet off to Paris or somewhere else.
Yeah, next place is in North Loop, Nebraska.
Okay, well, there
Okay.
you go. Almost like Paris.
It's just like well, we did our TLC was in uh, New Orleans, so now I've started to refer to NOLA, North Loop, which is a village of 200 people. That's where our offices are. So I call it NOLO. I call it the Little Easy. So I'm gonna go to the Little Easy in a little while.
Well, thank you again, Jim, for being on Leaders Coaching Leaders.
I'm grateful for the invitation. Thank you both.
Oh, Peter, we just heard from a legend, man. Jim Knight was quite articulate about instructional coaching, and particularly the word listening. I loved some of the analogies that he shared that really resonated for me. Listening is to coaching as skating is to hockey, and
Mhm.
just the refinement of that you have to have when you are an instructional coach in being that listener. Just like the refinement you have to have, you can go out and skate, but if you're really wanting to play hockey well, skating's a component.
Yeah, and I mean, he had a book come out many years ago, obviously now, on better conversations. So these have been cornerstones of the work that he has focused on. And that's not always easy for coaches. I think sometimes coaches go in with a directive of what they think needs to be happening to the classroom. So hearing him talk about, um, you know, ch- engaging and listening, making sure that you're really hearing people is something that is important. And I know that he tries to model. Um, in our experience with instructional coaches, and that's why we brought up some things too, is that they don't always have a defined role. Sometimes they're the quasi administrator. So the biggest barrier that they have is that they don't know what their role is, which is often strange for me because, he has so much research out there, and there's been a lot talked about when it comes to instructional coaching from many researchers and us as well.
Mhm.
So the definition of the role is really interesting. But the other thing that to me is a what instructional coaches always have to think about are two questions that you and I often ask, like how is a strategy going to have an impact on students and teachers? And how are we going to effectively gather evidence to understand our impact? And coaches need to be able to do that to the equal amount that any teacher has to do that, because they have to make sure we know that there's also research to show that the way we practice strategies in the classroom might not be the way the research wants us to practice them. So there's so many nuances to that work, and getting to see teachers practice a strategy is important, but making sure it has an impact on student learning is what is even more important. So yeah, instructional coaching is just such an interesting topic overall.
Yeah, you hit what I felt like, the sweet spot. I almost think of, gosh, me, Peter, in some analogies, you have some, two slices of incredible bread,
Of
and
course, it's got to be about food.
it's
It
about
has to be
food,
about
Peter.
food.
It's about food.
Just
All
drop
my
Ida Garden's name in next.
yeah, well, I just think of he has those seven, factors that he put in his book, and the first three really are kind of like the top slice of bread of that getting ready. Um, how do you build the communication skills? How do you get ready for those instructional kinds of conversation? And that's the seventh one is how does it all connect into the system support?
Yeah.
But the sweet spot in the middle is what you just talked about. It's the impact, it's the instruction, it's the cycles of the process. And as we know, all sandwiches can look different. It could be, a grilled cheese sandwich, or it could be this, amazing deli sandwich. And what makes a difference is the what you put in the middle. And I
Mhm.
think that's what you talk about. And he shared that he used the word pathways in this coaching, and that, all as adults and we're being coached, we need to be listening, and what pathway do we go through to make the impact. If, let's say, if you were coaching me, and that's
Yeah.
that middle of the sandwich that you
Mhm.
know I'm kind of a lots of different kinds of cheeses in that grilled cheese sandwich, and I know you like that well, so we may have similar pathways in that
Yeah.
coaching model, but somebody else might not, and that's those middle his factors like 4 through 6, I think that is what you talked about. The really the transfer, the making of difference in the shifts of the person that you're coaching.
Yeah, and I think the other element is, you and I coach each other a lot in different things, whether it's writing books or within the presentation, you will come up to me and say, hey, I don't think they're really understanding, we need to be more clear, those kind of things. And to me, coaching like we do it, and hopefully like instructional coaches are doing it, is not to enable somebody, but it's to empower them. And that's what it's all about. It's about empowerment so they can grow. And that's what good coaching is supposed to be focused on.
Yeah, and if we bring the food thing home, Peter, to the end of this podcast, we could just quote Ina Garten and just say, Jim Knight's, 7 factors. How easy is that?
That's it. And that's where we can end. I'm glad you got the opportunity to talk about food and Ina Garten. So thanks to Jim Knight for being our guest. Thank you to everyone for listening. We get a lot of feedback and we'd like continued feedback. If you like the podcast a lot on your favorite podcast station, just make sure you like us, give us a like, and also look on the YouTube channel for the videos. And you can certainly give us a like there. It's all about the likes, Mike. I just really want to know people like us. So
it would be a good thing. Yeah.
Well, Michael, always good to see you. And until next time.
Yes. Can't wait.